the tool to use is to Boa tarde, então, para todos. Acho que nós já devemos começar. We have to start. We're at 7 minutes late, so that's a good. Okay, we're going to have actually today two presentations, but prior to our presentations, one on education, the other on primary education, the other on vocational training. I'm going to have, as you know, the Mozambique IGC team has two lead academics, Sandra and Pedro, Pedro Vicente. I'm going to ask Sandra to provide in 4 or 5 minutes a brief overview of our research agenda, what we have been doing and what we're planning to do in the coming years. Okay, at least in the coming 2 years, 1 or 2 years. Okay?
So I'll get started. So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to our session. So I wanted to just give you an overview, as Calvi said, of what we've been working on in the past 3 years since the inception of the program. And we've been forward-looking what type of research we would like to support. So we wanted to encourage you, and for those who are interested, in applying the proposals for specific research to be conducted in Mozambique that we could support. So at the moment we have 2 broad clusters within our research program that are related to what we see as being the key problem in Mozambique today. So Mozambique does not have a growth problem, right? So it's been growing incredibly fast in the last 4 to 5 years, and we expect it to continue to be the case in the next at least 5 to 10 years. The major issue is one of development, though, and redistribution of that growth. So it's what we tend to call the threats to the growth process. It's not just starting growth, it's just that what are the threats to that economic growth. And here we want to look at issues that are a bit more at the micro level, of what are the micro foundations of growth. One being private sector development, and the second one related to the provision of public goods. Okay, so state effectiveness, the capability of the state to be able to provide basic public goods. So under private sector development, we started off with a very good piece of work done by John Sutton, by Professor John Sutton here from LSE, who did an enterprise map of Mozambique, which gave us a sense of what are the key, right there, I am told. And that gives us a sense of what are the main obstacles that firms face in Mozambique. So what are the productivity challenges? Obviously, Mozambique is not different from many other African countries in the sense that there tends to very few large firms and medium-sized firms. So that's a key challenge that we face in trying to not only increase productivity of these firms, but there are issues also related to management practices. So there's a large study being supported by the IGC, conducted by Jonathan Wienan and Nick Bloom, where they're doing a comparative study across many countries on the levels of managerial capabilities, particularly at large firms. And as we saw this morning, there was a session presenting this work where Mozambique was actually in one of the tails. It's the country that has some of the lowest levels of managerial capital. So it's definitely something that the IGC would like to support, is research that builds on both the enterprise map and the work being done by Nick Bloom and Jonathan Wienan to try to, once we've identified the problems and what the knowledge gaps are, to try to test new interventions that can improve this managerial capital, that can improve the productivity of firms. Okay? So that's within the private sector development sphere. Then we have public service provision. And so we're already supporting some excellent work by Christine on secondary education, with a particular focus on gender issues. So Christina, what we see today is looking at female dropout rates, which tend to be incredibly high also in Mozambique. So we're looking forward to seeing that project reach completion and reach some interesting policy implications as well. We're also investing in some projects related to health, so in the health sector. And here we're looking also with a gender component, looking at how to improve antenatal care in Mozambique. Now, so these are the main areas that we are working on. There's a third area which we cannot neglect, given that it's a key issue for Mozambique in particular, which is natural resource management. Okay? And that's one where we're just starting our research here, and we're interested in everything from the management of the revenues from resource extraction to the management of that resource extraction as well. So these are kind of the key three areas that we would like to support in the coming years. And if you have any interest, or if you know of people who would be interested, researchers who would be interested in working with us, you can either approach myself or Tim, and we would be very happy to kind of ease your way into doing research in the country.
Okay, so we're going to start our first presentation. I'd like to call Professor Christine Valente. She's going to speak, not that way, she's going to speak about learning from innovative conditional transfers in education in Mozambique, followed by Dr. Soriano's comments.
Right, so thank you very much for choosing the Mozambique session, and I look forward to your questions and comments. Absolutely no problem interrupting me, especially if something is not clear. Please do, feel free. We only have 2 presentations, 4 times 2, so we should have plenty of time. Okay, so this is joint work with Damien Dewa from the World Bank research group, and this is a brief outline. So first I'm going to basically define what conditional transfers are, for those who are not familiar with the idea. I'm then going to talk about, basically give some background on education in Mozambique that is directly relevant to our project. Then I'm going to give some motivation for the specific project we're working on, and then move on to some qualitative evidence that we collected with support from IGC this year in rural Mozambique, where basically we went and tested from a qualitative point of view perspective that our hypothesis and the general research questions we had made sense, in the context of rural Mozambique. And then I'm going to describe the proposed RCT research protocol before concluding. So just to give you an idea of where we're at, so as I said, we've had an exploratory grant from IGC, which has allowed us to refine this project and gather qualitative evidence that I will mention later on. And we've now heard that we're very pleased to have received further funding from IGC. We've also received funding from the World Bank, and we're now looking for the funding that's left in order to be able to kickstart the project. And hopefully this should arrive on time before next summer, which is the day that we have in order to start the project. So really at this stage, comments are very, very much welcome. Right, so what are conditional transfers? Essentially, they're social transfers, so that's the definition from the World Bank website, in which the payment is made conditional upon some behaviors of recipients. Okay? So typically, it's going to be regular school attendance of their children or regular health center visits. Okay? So you probably all have heard about Progressa, which was the first really large conditional cash transfer program started in Mexico, where, so maybe in terms of advertising what researchers can do to policymakers, there was this policymaker in Mexico who had this sort of, at the time, revolutionary idea of not only starting a big, new, ambitious social program, but also getting some academics on board in order to evaluate the effectiveness of the program. And that's what he did with very prestigious academics. And they found that it was effective, quite largely so. And since then, conditional cash transfers have now basically expanded throughout the world. So that's how useful, it can be to have a good, reliable evaluation to start with. So as of 2009, there were these type of conditional transfer programs were implemented in 29 developing countries. So they're very popular, but there are still a bunch of unanswered questions about these programs. So two of them, into which we're going to dwell in this project, is first, what is the independent role of the information component of the conditionality? So it will become a lot clearer, but basically the idea is that when there is a conditional cash transfer, when parents receive the transfer, if there is any form of asymmetry of information in terms of the behavior that the transfer is being conditioned on, then by receiving the transfer, the parent learns something about the behavior. Okay, so typically, if the parent doesn't observe perfectly whether the child attends school or not, then by receiving a transfer that they know they wouldn't be receiving if the kid had been missing school more than 10% of the time, then they know that the child was at school at least 90% of the time, say, if that was the condition. Okay, so this information component has been only very recently acknowledged in a recent study by Bertsin and Kaufman in 2012, published in Journal of Political Economy. But we still don't know exactly. I'll explain how we explore this further, but the idea is that we don't know exactly fully what the implications of these information components are. A second question that is, for instance, you've probably heard a lot about different conditional transfer programs where the money, say, goes either to the mother or to the father, and some RCTs, some randomized controlled trials, have actually tested the relative effectiveness of giving to the child's mom or the child's dad, but there's very little evidence about whether giving to the child is better or different to giving to the parent. Okay, so now some background on education in Mozambique. So I knew that education in Mozambique was low on average, but I didn't know quite how low it was, to be honest, before I actually looked up the figures. And basically, as of 2012, the average mean years of education in the adult population was the lowest in all the countries listed in this UNDP database, okay, at only 1.2 years of education on average. So, of course, there's been progress recently, so there have been large increases in enrollment in primary schooling, especially, but like many places in Africa, a lot of kids now go to school at some point, but still few kids finish complete primary school. Okay. It's especially the case for females. So in the case of Mozambique, you have EP1 and EP2. So EP1 are the first 5 years of primary school, and EP2 the last 2 years. And basically, as of EP2, you see that kids start dropping out quite massively, and especially so for girls. So parallel to these low levels of education in the general population, you also have a very high fertility rate, which hasn't been going down at all. In fact, if anything, it's trending slightly upwards in the past 10 years or so. So this combination of exceptionally low levels of education and high fertility levels make you think that something that improves education, especially for women, could be especially beneficial from the point of view of sustaining the high levels of growth that we've seen recently. So now let's motivate more specifically what we want to do. So what we want to do is assess the effectiveness of traditional and more innovative alternatives to the standard model of conditional transfers, right? And by innovative, I say including low cost, because of course that's one of the issues, is that, you know, why are there so many conditional cash transfer programs in Latin America and fewer in Africa? Well, one of the reasons is that it's quite costly, and so it would be nice to know a bit more about what we can do on the cheap, so to speak. So what we want to look at is what is the effect of providing only information on attendance to parents or guardians. Okay. And the second thing, so that's basically a new and also cheaper alternative to what is normally done, for instance in the case of Progressa and similar programs. And also we want to compare the effectiveness of rewarding parents versus rewarding children. So more broadly speaking, so that's from the
Yes, about that. So rewarding parents and children, is this with cash-based or some?
So I will describe the protocol we've evolved towards. So say in a world where there was no mutual consideration and where everybody had individual bank accounts, including children and parents, then you would probably just give conditional cash transfers to parents or conditional cash transfers of the same amount to children, and then compare the relative effectiveness. But there are ethical issues, and also it's very likely that children of 13 or 14 years old, in a rural context, if you give them a bunch of cash, they probably will have to either give them directly to their parents, or they will be pressured into giving it back to their parents or other members of the family. So, so what we're going to do is try and get as close as possible to a comparability between incentivizing parents and incentivizing children, whilst keeping these practical and ethical considerations into consideration.
So is the paper by Jen Berry in India?
Yes, so this is actually the closest. So it's an old working paper, and I think that there are several differences that make this paper, which I think it was a great idea to start with, not so informative. So the first thing is that so it's in India, right? And what they incentivized, or what he incentivized, was performance as a test. Okay, that's the first thing. And I'll discuss the implications of that. The second thing is that these children are in grade 1 or 2, so they're really young, probably don't have a lot of autonomy. So the kind of intra-household considerations that we have in mind probably don't apply so much to this group. And there's also an issue of power. Like if you look at the standard, so the conclusion is that there's no difference, except for a certain subgroup of parents. So you always wonder, what this means or how to interpret that. The fact that you find the treatment effect only in one subgroup. So he finds there's no difference between incentivizing parents and incentivizing children. But if you look at the confidence intervals, you can't rule out that there was quite a big difference. So there are several reasons why. Also, I was actually talking to Rachel Lannister about this a couple of days ago, and she said that what they found out is that because they were incentivizing tests results, then one of the things that happened is that some of the kids were beaten up by their parents for not performing well enough. So there were issues, which was basically all these practical issues are real ones, are real considerations, which is why we wanted to have an exploration phase where we really go out there and try and understand, what we can and cannot do in the context that we're looking at.
On the first, what's
the first one, I'm going to get to that quite precisely. So, yeah, that's really just broader motivation. And so this is the sort of really applied consideration that any policymaker can probably engage with. For the researchers here, more broadly speaking, what we want to shed light on is how decisions within the household are made with respect to investments in the human capital of children. Okay, so I have a completely separate research project where I look at resource shares of children within the household. Okay, and typically there's been a move recently from considering children as a public good that parents kind of share in the household to thinking of children as decision makers. And in fact, there's a recent paper that tests whether children are decision makers within the household in terms of household expenditures, and they find that they are. So I think that this idea that what matters is it the cost-benefit calculation of the child or that of the parent or both is something that we don't really know very much about. And in fact, as researchers, we tend to assume that when kids are not in school, especially in developing countries, it's because the parents are not sending them, because the parents don't want to, i.e. the parents are the binding constraint, but it may not be the case. Okay, so I think that's where I'm going to really get to the information. So why would parents and children disagree on school attendance? Okay? So first, parents and children might have different perceived costs and benefits of attending school. So these might be for different reasons. So first, you would assume that parents are, say, even assuming that parents and children have the same objective, which is to maximize the child's returns, income, okay, in terms of income, subject to cost, obviously. Parents may under or overestimate just how much displeasure or how much pleasure the child derives from attending school. Okay? So what they think is optimal may not be from the point of view of the child. They may also have different discount rates. Okay? So essentially, for those who are not academics in the room, the discount rate is by how much you discount future earnings. So it's not crazy to think that children and parents, even if they agree on how much more a child is going to earn by completing primary school, for instance, rather than not, they may disagree on how much do I care about an extra $500 10 years from now. Okay? And you would expect that children discount the future more. Okay, so this may also basically mean that their preferences in terms of whether or not the child attends school may not be aligned. And finally, which is probably not very common, but still you may think that parents are not altruistic, and whereas of course children care about themselves, therefore they may just disagree because of that. There may also be asymmetric information. Okay, the paper I mentioned earlier by Berson and Kaufman. Essentially, what they have, okay, we're going to slightly technical terms, they have a principal agent model where the parent, say, wants the child to go to school, but does not observe perfectly the behavior of the child, i.e. the parent doesn't know for sure whether or not the child attends school. What they have is a certain imperfect ability to observe their attendance, okay, which you can call a monitoring technology. And what Berson and Kaufman show is that when the monitoring technology is not good enough, then for some children-parent pairs for whom the child attending school would have been the optimal strategy, it can't be enforced because the parent does not observe sufficiently well what the child does in order to incentivize the child to do the right thing. Okay? So, in this case, the implication of that is that providing information to parents on children's attendance could increase attendance for these parent-child pairs, where the optimal strategy with a better monitoring technology would be for the child to go to school, but is not under the current available monitoring technology. Okay? So that is the implication from their model, okay, which they themselves make. Right? So what they do in their paper is that, so there's something, a conditional cash transfer going on in Brazil called Bolsa Família, and what they do is that in one locality, they invite a bunch of parents who are on the conditional cash transfer program, and they make them offers between retaining their current conditional cash transfer program or opting for an unconditional transfer program, cash transfer program, of a higher amount. Okay? And then they vary by how much more. And basically, 80% of parents say they prefer the conditional cash transfer, which, if they don't value conditionality, and if they don't want to just please the interviewer, then it's completely irrational. Okay? So what they do, in order to test the extent to which is the information component of the conditional transfer that the parents value, they then repeat an experiment that is similar, except that now, when they make these offers between staying on the conditional cash transfer they're on, or moving to an unconditional cash transfer of a higher amount, they then add information on child attendance being sent by text. And in that case, where basically you remove the information component of the conditional cash transfer, only 30% of parents prefer the conditional cash transfer. So the conclusion is that parents do value, and quite a lot, conditional cash transfer. Sorry, the information component of the conditional cash transfer. However, what they don't do, and they say it themselves, is that they don't test directly for the independent effect of providing the information on its own, which is one of the things we want to do. Okay, so as I said, in order to sort of establish whether the kind of hypotheses and things we have in mind are reasonable in the context of rural Mozambique, so I went to Manica province in May this year, and we carried out some focus group interviews with my NGO partner, Margarito. So with girls aged 12 to 15 and their parents. Obviously, we didn't interview the parents and the girls together, but we met with the parents and then we met with the girls. And so I don't have time here to get into all the details, but the bottom line is that children's opinions seem to matter. Okay, it's qualitative, but still, people report that their opinions matter in the decision to attend or even to drop out of school. If we have time at the end, I can give you some examples. It's really funny, like when parents contrast two girls of theirs, and they really say one of them really likes school, the other one doesn't, and it's exactly what you would expect. But in our country, say, in England, that's just what you do. When you're 12, when you're 15, you just go to school, and that's it, pretty much, in most places. Okay, at least most of the time. Whereas, in a country like Mozambique or other places in rural Africa, where if the kid doesn't want to go to school, they probably just don't go. There's also asymmetric information in school attendance. That seems reasonable, based on what people say. Things will say things like, yeah, I know they leave in the morning, but I don't know if they reach school. I don't know. And even us, we're in a school setting, and there were kids who were just outside the school playing, but they never actually went into the classroom. So obviously the parents can't know that. Also, parents and children, so they express support. That's a bit unsurprising, right? They say when you ask them if someone could do anything in order to encourage them to attend regularly, they come up with things that you could give them, and they seem quite supportive. But what's really interesting is that, what I found a bit surprising actually, is that, of course you can say that maybe that they thought that's what we wanted to hear, but both parents and children were really adamant that you should give to the children because they're the ones who need to be motivated. That's really what came out of all these focus groups.
They're the ones that what?
That need to be motivated. They're the kids.
And these are how old?
12 to 15. Don't worry. Yes,
Sorry, about number 2. Can you tell us about the sort of standard procedures in schools in Mozambique in terms of taking attendance and then providing this information to parents, perhaps on a quarterly basis, not on a weekly or even daily basis?
So I haven't done a sort of representative study or anything at this stage, but the school we went to, the records were completely haphazard. Some teachers take them relatively well, others don't. Generally speaking, they're not very well taken, and certainly the parents didn't even mention having any form of report on attendance records. What parents did say they used as signal of, in order to monitor whether or not their kids went to school, is to see whether there was any entry in the daily caderno diario, like the daily notebook that they're supposed to, on which they're supposed to work every day. And we also had kids who said, yeah, some girls, they just write, some girls, because we were talking to girls, right? Some girls, they just write on their own and they pretend there's corrections so that their parents think they've used school.
Is this issue directly driven by the decision by the children, or could this in part be driven by teacher absenteeism? I understand there was a paper on India which reports massive levels of teacher
so that's something that I do wonder about as well. And so again, I haven't done a systematic study. I'm sure that teacher absenteeism is probably higher than in Europe, for instance. I don't know how bad it is compared to India or Uganda or other countries. I need to check if there's a World Bank initiative across Africa where they've been taking these kind of measurements, but so far I haven't seen anything on Mozambique. But I will have a look at it. And also, one thing we're really concerned about and we wanted to have a feel about was if we did incentivize girls, okay, and then would they keep whatever we give them? And is there any way in which we can give them, or anything we can give them that would make it more likely for them to keep it, right? And so what they were all pretty adamant about is that if you transferred them things such as shoes, school uniforms, and school bags, rather than say a lady bag that maybe their mother can use, then they would just keep it. There are quite strongly expressed views that, one of them said something that I thought was really funny, is that today I'm given a new pair of shoes because I've been going to school. It's not to go back to school barefoot the following day. So, of course there would probably be, some
Is there a secondary market for this thing?
So I am sure that there would be places, like say in urban areas, pretty sure there would be some kind of secondary market, and maybe now they don't even think about it. We sort of try to probe about this idea, but so first thing to say is that maybe there would be, and if there were, then yeah, you can think that maybe parents would take it so that they can sell it. But nobody mentioned that, even the girls, and they're pretty sophisticated. Like the girls, for instance, were telling you, oh, if you gave us money, then that would be a problem, because even if the parent was sort of fair-minded, then they would have to take some, travel to some place where they buy something that the girl wants, say, so that would cost some money. Then by the time they get there, maybe the parent realizes that they need soap at home, they need food or whatever, and then by the time they reach the stage where they're actually going to buy the thing for the girl, then you would only have half the money left. So I think that the girls were pretty savvy, and no one mentioned that they would sell it back. Also,
typically, like these things are sold in schools or not?
No.
So is it only like secondary market, or so when they want to buy these things new, where do they buy them?
They would have to go to the nearest market place or market town or something. As far as I know, there are no actual school uniforms in primary schools in Mozambique. It's just that when you ask them what would you like to motivate you to go to school, they say school uniforms. They really like the idea. So first it's the clothing, but also the fact that it gives them some kind of respectability and some kind of status as a student seems to be something that, which if you're familiar with some school uniform, free school uniform RCTs that seem to have had really huge effects given the small amount of money that it represents, I kind of wonder myself whether maybe one of the reasons is that it's basically motivating the kids. So, okay, so the second thing I was going to say is that even if there was a secondary market, say it would only be it would be a concern if the parents were going to get it and then sell it, but not if the girls were just going to sell it themselves, because that would be fine. Also, one thing we were asking is whether or not they think that if you gave these items in the public ceremony, it would increase the probability that they retain them, and they were all pretty much saying that, yeah, because people would be ashamed to take it from them. So yeah, there may be some, but hopefully, it doesn't seem like it should be a real concern. So
Can they have names?
Can they have their names on it? Well, we could possibly think about it. It's already a bit of a logistical.
I would have thought,
sorry.
I work in Myanmar, and one of the western states there's a big secondary market in UNICEF store bags. But that's not from the school children. I think you might, even if you go to villages there, you see it, but they buy them from the markets in the town.
Right.
It's the guy who works for UNICEF for the whole state that's selling them, because I think for most rural parents, maybe you go to the town and you can buy one, but you wouldn't go to the town to sell one bag, and probably you wouldn't have such good bargaining power. Whereas he's selling thousands into the local markets, and the kids like them because they're good quality. Kind of linked to that, I was wondering if, when looking at in-kind payments, although in that case it's not a proper conditional transfer, it's just UNICEF giving bags out. Although in that case you do have bags being resold. Do you think generally is it easier to reduce leakage with in-kind payments than with cash transfers?
I don't know about that. I really wouldn't know, because I think it would really depend on the context.
It could be if you can show there's less leakage with in-kind, then you get more cost effectiveness than with cash.
Yeah, that's really not what we're going to be able to show here or not, but we may try and, yeah, that's a good point. Right, so based on our initial hypothesis and then this qualitative work that we've done, here are the sort of RCT protocol we came up with. So in treatment arm, say, okay, so we've done some power calculations, and we would probably have to have So about 50 schools in each of the 4 treatment or control arms I'm going to mention. So in the first one, we will give basically money equivalent tokens to girls, right, for attendance, say 90% of the time. And they could then use the tokens to buy a selected number of items that in the qualitative work we've done, they've mentioned as something they would both like to have and something that they would be able to retain. So in this case, school uniforms, ideally with a name tag on it. But we're doing a focus group interview, and there was a guardian with a t-shirt that said, if the police doesn't know, it's not illegal, in English. And I explained to him what it meant, and he was like, oh. So I'm not sure that having someone else's name tattooed on you would really be a disincentive. But, so shoes as well, school bag, and some smaller materials such as notebooks, etc., which could be ordered and then delivered, it's ordered from us, and then delivered at the school. And so these tokens, the idea is that they would be labeled in essentially meticage, the local currency, so that for it to look as close as possible to money, essentially, and then these items would be priced in terms of token values. Whereas in treatment arm B, so that's a sort of plain vanilla conditional cash transfer to parents, except for the fact that we would still make the same items available, so that, because here basically the problem is that these items are not available locally. So we're kind of, also changing the supply. So here you also want to change the supply to sort of allow parents to decide that what they want to do with the money, if they want to, is to buy those items. So in treatment arm C, so that's the information treatment, okay, where basically we just give parents, so no transfers, we just give parents information on girls' attendance. Some certificate of exemplary attendance, that should be correct. And basically the control group where nothing happens except that we encourage them to have at the end of the term the same type of ceremony that we will have in the other places. The idea being just that maybe by having a ceremony we're increasing salience, and this maybe in itself may have an effect. So the idea is that by comparing the effect of what happens on attendance in treatment arm A and B, so girls versus parents incentives, we will compare basically the effectiveness of the two. By comparing treatment arm C with A and B, we'll be able to disentangle from arm A and B treatment effects what came from the information component of the conditional transfer. And finally, control group will basically be directed.
Now, the value of the transfer is 5 to 7% per child in the household.
Well, per child, who's per girl aged 12 to 15.
But would there be like 2 girls in the same household?
There could be 2 girls aged 12 to 15,
Okay.
yeah, that's right. So, just to compare, I think progressive was about 20%. Okay, so I'm probably running out of time. I've just said that. Okay, good. So, so basically we propose an innovative intervention to learn about the optimal design of conditional transfers to increase female enrollment in Mozambique. And the idea is to provide options for policymakers based on some evidence. And so the RTT testing of the relative effectiveness of different schemes will also allow us to shed light more generally on how decisions on investments in human capital or churn are made within the household, which is something of general interest to both academics but also policymakers in other countries and interested in other aspects of human capital.
Very good. What I'm going to ask Dr. Soberano, Dr. Antônio Soberano to come, so comments and for a presentation, then we'll have a brief discussion and then we'll move on. Okay, then Dr. Soberano, please. Dr. Soberano is just properly. Okay, Dr. Soberano is Director of Primary Schooling and Ministry of Education in Mozambique.
Maybe it's coming. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge this opportunity to be here. It's an honor I'm honored to participate in this conference. I used to work in an institution that was dealing with curriculum development and research almost for 10 years. And it's a pleasure to be, after 10 years, be in this conference. I'm not going to summarize the presentation to keep time, and I'll go through the contribution. But it's not coming, I don't know. Oh. Maybe it's... Yeah. I would like to salute the researchers for the work that they're doing. And I think that this research is relevant, actual, and could contribute for the government to face the challenge to increase the enrollment of the girls in post-primary education. I think that in the background it's important to explain that at the age of 12 to 15 years, the children should be in principle in secondary education, because our system is 7 and the enrollment age is 6, so children who complete 6 years in this year, and this, the family is composed of 7 years plus 3 of secondary, lower secondary education, and another plus 2 years of upper secondary education. And the secondary education is not free. Despite the primary education is free, the parents should buy uniform, shoes, and other issues for the children. And the access for the post-primary is still a challenge, and I'm doing my comment taking account the range, the age, the target of the children. So I assume that we are talking in secondary education. But even if it's a primary, we in terms of parity, we almost reached the parity in primary education. When you go to the school in primary, you can find the boys and girls at the same, and we even have some province, one of our province, and one of the issues that we are going to see what happens. We have more girls than boys in primary education, that is in Gaza province. And but if we're looking for the distance, maybe these issues of distance could be one of the factors that we have lower rate of frequency and high rates of dropouts. And another issues that I think that it is important to clarify the concept of poverty, or at least you can use the same concept that is being using by the government. What is the meaning of poverty, to be sure which will be the group that will focus and who will be benefit from this transfer. Because we have experience in one of the programs that it was called it was for the children that the vulnerable children, orphan and vulnerable children, and we have to stop this program because of this criteria of who is vulnerable, because the concept of vulnerable is to hide, and sometimes is so I don't know what you say in English, but in Portuguese we say that it's subjective.
Subjective.
It's subjective, the same. Okay, thank you. And I think that it's also important to use the database that we have in the Ministry of Education. Fortunately, we have a range of data, statistic data, and to correlate the or the impact or the relation that because the government is already in place putting programs, a lot of programs to increase the enrollment, particular for girls. That one of it, the school, we're building more schools. We're building. We are also giving the for primary education the textbook is for free. For secondary education, despite the secondary is not for free, and the government knows that it's not every parent who can afford to buy the textbook for the children. We are putting, we are supplying the library, the school library, with the textbooks, so the children can have access to these textbooks. And we also have one program that is a direct program support to school. That is amount of money that is given for each school. And this money will be managed by the school with the school council. And for this money, the part that they use to buy the exercise book, pens, and other materials that they distribute for the children. And another issue that I think that we have to look for the interest, because related with these issues, how the parents have different perception regarding with the school. Maybe it's better also to see the issues of literacy, because we still have a higher rate of illiteracy. In particular, in Manica province, the rate is 43, and for women is 49.7. And we know that if the mother is not literate, sometimes she was the one who have the power for this to guide the children to go or not to the school. And I think that we have to look all this. And for Manica, when we look for the population, this percentage is half of the women are literate, so it's too high. And I also think that it's good to see the issues of school environment, how the school environment is friendly, because it can be also to promote the children to be more to go to school or not. Particular for girls, if the school doesn't have toilets, access to water, and the relation between the boys and the girls, and even among the girls, and between the teacher and the girls, maybe they can be an a factor for the girls to go to the school. And regarding with these also, I think that we have to look also for the cultural, social, and economic factors. Because sometimes we can find in some place that due to the poverty, and the parents have to move for the other place looking for the better lands for agriculture. And when they move with their children, usually they don't inform the school where the children were studying. They just move. So we don't have also the information to see that this children was moved and he or she is really out of the school, or she or he was moved to another school. So we have these also these issues that we have to take in account. We also have this problem of the passage rights, that some are good and other ones they're not. And the government is also working with the communities to take this good right that helps for the development of the citizenship or the human being. And those that were not good, we are the government is discussing with the community not to discontinue this. And fortunately, we have in some place that we agreed that the rites of passage, they're not being happen during the examination period. Because in the previous years, the children went to school, but when because the rite of passage was in the same time, they didn't attend the examination, and we could pay this. And I think that another issues. Because then one of the comment that in the same family, one of the girls said that she wants to go to the school, and another and the sister said that no, maybe this we also have to look for the school environment. Who is the teacher? How is the class? Because sometimes maybe the teacher of one is a good teacher or he's already present, and another one maybe have absent, and this doesn't motivate the girl to go to the school. And I think that the last but not the least, I think that we have to also think about the sustainability, because these issues of transfer is an issue that the government already have been thinking. And we are discussing with the Minister of Education and the Ministry of Women and Social Affairs to think how we can support the families, but then it comes these issues of sustainability. Because when it's a project, we have money, but when it comes that the government should assume the program, then sometimes we don't have, the government doesn't have the resource to continue. Just to give an example, for secondary education, more than almost 90% of the budget for the secondary is to pay salaries. So if we fall for this, it will be difficult. And at the end, we'll salute and say that we are here to help in what we can do. And as Professor Jonathan Lips said yesterday, we have to work together. And thank you.
Okay, let's suggest on the advantage of moving forward. At the end, we're going to have the discussion for everyone. Let's move forward, and the next presentation will be Vocational Training and Labor Market. Professor Pedro Martins is a professor of applied economics at Queen's Mary, University of London. And then we're going to have some comments, and then we'll have a wrap-up Q&A.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I'm trying this new technology. It's not completely sure. Okay. I'll press the button again. Okay, seems to be okay. Yeah. Once again, thank you really a lot. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to address this issue in this prestigious event. What I propose to do is to address briefly the following three topics. A little background, which I suppose we can skip very quickly, or we can skip at all, given the expertise in the room on issues that have to do with Mozambique. Some comments about the institutional framework, and then the more substantial part of the presentation, some topics regarding policy, which may be of interest. There are a number of caveats that I would like to make. The first one is that I'm not really an expert in development economics. I'm a labor economist, very much focused on European labor markets, I suppose. I have an interest in these topics, and I'm very grateful for the invitation, but this is really not my expertise. The case of Mozambique is also a case that I'm very fond of for many reasons, including family reasons. I've grown to, I've spent some time learning more about the labor market. Although I've conducted some research in the past on developing countries, in particular in the case of Brazil, another caveat that I would like to mention is that, of course, it's always perhaps a little awkward when one is talking about a country that is not one's own country, but I suppose one can have an interesting and mutually relevant discussion about these themes. Last point, to apologize for having sent the slides very, very late, which of course creates difficulties for the discussant. I appreciate your willingness to discuss the paper in any case. Let me then start. I should say it's not a standard presentation. I'm an academic. I've delivered many presentations. This is different in many ways. There's not a data set and an empirical analysis. So it's really different. I've not done these presentations for some time. I have some experience in policy. I was in the Portuguese government for a couple of years in the past. Perhaps I will draw more on that experience in terms of this presentation. It is well known that Mozambique has exhibited very high growth rates over the last 20 years or so. More recently, big growth area has to do with extractive industries. Aluminium exports are quite sizable, and indeed there is a considerable potential in terms of specific areas such as coal and gas. This has implications in terms of the topic of the presentation, which is the interplay between vocational training and the labour market, and may also have important connections with some of the main areas of the AGC, namely from public provision, public goods provision, and also incentives in terms of the private sector. Coming to more specific labour market issues and variables, it is also well known the low level of schooling, a point that was emphasized in the previous presentation, as well as salary facts that have to do with underemployment. So a large percentage of the workforce may be in employment, but for a limited number of hours per week, much less than the standard reference value of, for instance, 40 hours per week. So there is spare capacity in some sense, and part of that may be explained by some interplay between job and some time spent on training. This is a phenomenon that I believe is becoming more widespread among the specific cohorts of the Mozambique population, but still there is indeed much evidence of gaps that can be filled, partly in terms of training. Of course, from a developing perspective, it's also common to observe a relatively low level of formality. The numbers that I have available indicate that only 6% of the population are in the formal sector, very much concentrated in the services industries and in the southern province of Maputo. Of course, the size of the labour market is very large. The number of new labour market entrants every year is over 300,000. Some estimates predict a figure as large as 500,000 in 10 years' time. So there is, I believe, an important challenge in terms of public policy that may ensure that these new workers are qualified and can successfully enter and stay in the labour market. Most jobs, again, as in other developing country settings, can be found in smallholder agriculture or the urban informal sector. And one last point that perhaps can merit some additional discussion in the end concerns some indications of perceptions of inequality, or from a labor market perspective in European setting, one would say dualism, namely some challenges for those that find themselves in the informal sector to move, to be upgraded in some way into the formal sector. The segmentation between the two sides of the labor market is something that can create or be conducive to some levels of frustration that can have also political implications. So these are some of the variables that I believe are important in terms of understanding the current challenges, but also potential of the Mozambique labor market, creating some questions in terms of training. There have been a number of political initiatives over the last 10 to 15 years in Mozambique. I've tried to conduct an overview of some of the main documents that are relevant from this perspective. I believe that there has always been a view in terms of the importance of vocational training, starting with this resolution of the Council of Ministers from as back as from 1997. There is an emphasis on the vocational training of the unemployed, on retraining of current employees, and also on the training of trainers. Of course, this is quite important as well. A number of additional documents have been issued over the last years. An important one is this national strategy for employment and professional training, creating a number of bodies that are tasked with the reform of professional education. One important point, I believe, is the emphasis on the creation of bodies that represent different parts of the Mozambique government, including the labor dimension and the education dimension. My experience in a different context is that having these two departments talking to each other on matters that are to some extent at the border of those two departments can be extremely fruitful in ensuring that these initiatives are successful. A new buzzword that I've read in the latest documents concerns the emphasis on demand-led training system. This is something that I believe is also extremely important. From my experience, it can be quite challenging to implement, but to the extent that it is successful, it can deliver a lot of advantages, namely by ensuring that training provision is very much in tune with the latest needs from the labor market. This constant updating of the training provision elements is something that, in some occasions is quite difficult from a public sector perspective, which is faced with a number of constraints in terms of its functioning. So this emphasis on the provision of demand-led training, I believe, is quite important and can really deliver good results. On the other hand, the emphasis on the establishment of a qualifications framework may, in some occasions, hinder the set effort in terms of a close proximity of the range of qualifications on offer and the qualifications that are actually demanded from the labor market. These qualifications framework can sometimes become a little too ossified, become a little too out of touch with the latest needs of the labor market, in particular when the government or the government agency responsible for these matters finds it difficult to bring the more up-to-date players in terms of training provision. So I think this, from a practical perspective, is something that, although very useful in general terms, can be quite challenging in terms of actual delivery. One important trend from my reading of the latest developments in vocational training is the emergence of a large number of private training providers. This is very much in tune with the previous aspects. This is partly related to the growth in foreign direct investments and the need that some of these multinationals identify in terms of being able to draw on a qualified workforce with the specific skills that are of relevance in those industries. So in many circumstances, or in many cases, these multinationals bring along a training branch that conducts specific targeted training for their workers. The network of training centers in INEFPA is of 11. This is complemented by, as we discussed before, over 150 private training centers and also approximately 60 employment centers. Much of the funding is delivered by the World Bank and a number of development agencies. Perhaps I can skip on some of these additional institutional aspects. They are very much in the direction of promoting a better connection with the labor market needs, while at the same time establishing some degree of formality in terms of the qualifications that are to be delivered by trainers. Perhaps I can go straight to the aspects that may be of greater relevance and can promote greater discussion in terms of the latest and future trends in reform of vocational education and training in Mozambique. Perhaps a very last point in this respect is to highlight the very recent professional education law that was approved only 2 months ago, which again provides greater focus on training aspects and indicates this co-funding by state and the private sector, and also introduces this tax of 1% of the salaries of workers. So this is of course important in terms of the provision of funds to deliver better training opportunities. On the other hand, of course it is well known that this tax wedge between what the employer pays for labor and what the worker receives for their labor can create inefficiencies that will lead to lower employment levels. I would conclude this presentation with some ideas that perhaps we can discuss later. I've grouped my thinking on some policy ideas that may be relevant in these 5 key bullet points. The first one regarding the potential expansion of the training centers network, mostly from the public perspective, but perhaps complemented by the private dimension. Perhaps the second point is about the interest, the relevance of conducting some focus on new training that can be offered in the future in terms of specific sectors, namely those that are export-oriented, but at the same time labor-intensive, in contrast with the sectors that are more capital-intensive, such as the case of mining. I believe there are some interesting ideas in the context of the promotion of foreign investment in the specific area of training provision, and then finally some reflections on the scope for some adjustments in some aspects in terms of employment regulations, which can have potential interesting effects in terms of employment levels, in particular within the formal sector. And the very last methodological aspect that actually links this presentation with the previous one. I think when one reads about the latest development in training provision in Mozambique, I think the thing that draws one's attention the most is this imbalance between the needs for conditional training and the supply that is currently available. Of course, there are several constraints, in particular from a funding perspective, but I think that the imbalance is so massive that, of course, the returns that would follow from any additional investment that could be delivered would be very, very, very likely of a big magnitude. And this is not only from the private dimension, but also, of course, from a social perspective, especially when the returns, the increments to one's productivity can be more or less quickly monetized through income obtained from exports and the resulting taxes. One aspect that perhaps we could discuss later has to do with the focus in terms of the recent reforms and the recent initiatives in the formal economy. I think there is a very large focus on that, and for of course, many understandable reasons. However, I wonder, given the large size of the informal sector, and given the evidence of relatively low levels of productivity in that informal sector, whether some small, even small investments in terms of additional training, for instance in the case of small-scale farming, would not deliver, again, very large returns. There are some ideas regarding the technological skills of some of these farmers. There are ideas regarding new methodologies, new inputs, new channels of transmission or delivery of these agricultural goods that could perhaps benefit greatly from the provision of some training. Perhaps one could discuss whether some rebalancing with greater emphasis on the informal economy would not be important and useful in this regard. There are also some ideas regarding further involvement of private providers. I'll come back to this in a couple of slides. As I mentioned earlier, perhaps 5 minutes, I wonder if I could hear your views on whether this regulation of training modules creates some challenges in terms of its practical applications, given that it may be difficult to keep in touch with the latest developments as to labor market needs. One additional idea that we also were able to discuss a little bit just before this session concerns the added value from a greater focus on the labor-intensive export sectors. Perhaps not so much mining as I put there, but mostly farming, food and beverages, and tourism. There is a large literature on the so-called foreign ownership wage differential, and my reading of the literature is very much that there is a big gap between the salaries of workers that are employed by foreign firms and the salaries of workers, of similar workers that are employed by domestic firms. And moreover, the magnitude of this gap is decreasing with the level of development of the country. So in this particular study, which uses data from Indonesia, Brazil, Portugal, UK, and Germany, there is a very clear downward relationship. So the gains that will inevitably spill over to the entire economy, namely through worker mobility, the gains from such focus on such sectors could be very sizable, not only in terms of the actual wages, but also in terms of employment levels. One additional idea that is currently becoming very much in fashion, not only in developed economies, also in developing countries, Brazil, for instance, has been very keen on apprenticeships over the last few years, is indeed a different training provision model whereby the worker or the youngster spends half of the time in a training center and half of the time in an actual business. This can be quite good in terms of ensuring that the training is directed to areas where the worker is likely, or the individual is likely to find a job, and there is a lot of evidence that indeed countries that draw extensively on the apprenticeship model have much lower unemployment rates in the case of developed countries. I think I'm running out of time. Perhaps briefly mention these additional ideas. One which is about the interest that perhaps further facilitation of foreign investment in the training provision industry could deliver. I think this is an area where again there is a big mismatch in terms of resources that are available in many countries, which could perhaps make a big difference, for instance, in the case of Mozambique. One point we were discussing just a moment ago was this view that perhaps there is some important degree of substitution between native and foreign workers, which has led to some regulations against the employment of foreign workers by firms in Mozambique. Perhaps one could consider a different view, which is more about complementarity than substitution. And by facilitating the hiring of foreign workers, perhaps the employment levels of those firms would actually expand also in terms of native workers. Finally, I thought it may be interesting for the purpose of discussion to highlight some evidence from the World Bank doing business study, in particular in the specific topic of the employment of workers. There are some issues that perhaps would merit reflection, in particular the indication that there is a relatively large ratio between the minimum wage and the value added per worker for those aged 19. So this may create challenges in terms of youth unemployment or youth inactivity rates. Perhaps this is something of relevance in terms of understanding the perspectives for higher levels of employment, in particular in the formal labor market in Mozambique. Lastly, a brief reference to some ideas regarding potential projects that involve an RCT approach in the specific context of vocational education and training. As I mentioned earlier, I think there is a huge potential added value from the provision of some additional technological training in the case of smallholder farming. This is an area where, according to some studies I've read, this is an area where some additional information on the latest, or not the latest technological perspectives can deliver big gains in terms of productivity, which would then have all sorts of positive knock-on consequences across the Mozambique economy and labor markets. Perhaps some additional area in the context of RCT, or more generally, that may also be of interest, is about the potential relevance of informal training systems in complement to formal training systems. So I think despite some below average schooling levels in some cases, many workers will have acquired considerable experience, even if they are currently placed in the informal sector. Some interactions, some interchanges between such workers and other workers may also be useful in terms of the provision of additional levels of training. Finally, some ideas involving new technologies, involving training vouchers, which may be an interesting way of involving private suppliers in the context of public provision, and also the issue of trainers' quality. There is a big literature, especially in developed countries, that emphasizes the huge difference that a good teacher can make. Very recently, there were 2 papers in the same issue of the American Economic Review making this point very, very clearly. And I think, and also there is some evidence in that respect, that some even small improvements in trainers' quality can also deliver a big impact in terms of students' outcomes. The very last point is related to this one, and is to emphasize the interest in drawing on more data, both at the worker and the firm level, and both on the formal and the informal sector. Of course, this is very challenging in many ways, but I think that's quite interesting, as well as this idea that I mentioned earlier of in some way combining the promotion of formality, but in such a way that one avoids some further segmentation of the labor market.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to call now, as a discussant, Mr. Refinado Villa Jr. He's from the National Institute of Employment and Vocational Training in Mozambique.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to apologize. I'm not making a presentation because I made the presentation in Portuguese. So I would do it in English, but the time was too short. And I took some notes during the presentation of the professor. So I'll discuss something they said and my presentation that I made, and I will put in some points, and we will discuss that together. So first of all, second one, it would be better if we understand first what is INEF, or National Institute of Vocational Training. National Institute of Vocational Training is an institute that provides training, vocational training to workers, unemployed people, and train people who want to risk this job. So, was created in 1997 by Decree 37 of 27 of October, and subordinated by Minister of Labor. So, INEF in general, sorry, I will say INEF in general has the vision to develop strategy of employment as a key to eradicate the poverty. So until now, INEF has 61 employment centers, including the private. So if you separate the private centers and the public, we have 11 public centers in all provinces in Mozambique. Mozambique has 11 provinces. So in each province, INEF has one center. So I'm speaking about the employment centers. So even in training, in vocational training, have 11 training centers. But if we include with the private centers, in the general is 186 vocational training centers. So each center has the duty to how can I say that? I will start with the employment center to register the candidates for the employment in the database, and when a factory want people to work in the factory, they send a profile with people they want. So the technical of the center and the database verify if there are people with that profile, and if they find these people, send an email to respond if they have or not. And the same thing happens with vocational training. But the big difference is that in the vocational training, the foreign factories, when they get the salary in Mozambique, they come with their own machines. In our vocational training, we don't have a lot of machines, so we are trying to improve it now. But when they start to search for these people, they send them to our centers. What happens is, when they find something difficult, they hire our trainers to go to the factory and make this formation on the center, in the center. And to improve this difficult in our centers, they created the strategy of employment and vocational training. To do what? It was created to Council of the Ministry in 2006, predicted to benefit 1 million of job seekers until 2050. So this number was exceeded until 2004 and was exceeded until the first half of 2014. That number was exceeded, reaching 2 million and 2 million and 2001, 53, being 25% women and 75% men. So the farm, civil construction and trade contribute around 48% for this number. So the main condition to have a vocational training in Mozambique, until 2003, everybody must have at least 7 degrees. But until 2005, that number was increased, because there are a lot of people without without school, but they know how to do the things. So they open a gap, or I can say a gap, to include these people without school. So until 2005, they start to accept those people who want to work without 7 degrees. That's why until 2009, I don't know the number exactly, but they had more people without school in the north of Mozambique. In the south of Mozambique, there is the most concentrated people. The foreign countries that are investing in Mozambique are hiring local people, but without information. That's why there have been a lot of working accidents, and some people got cut his hand or leg because they don't have information. That's why they sometimes send the workers to our centers in each province to have this training. So, other big problem that exists in Mozambique is the private provider of training, for vocational training. INEFP, or National Institute of Vocational Training, give them the people to do this vocational training, but they don't follow all the instruction given by the man. That's why sometimes in aspect do some inspection and some center that has the permit to do this vocational training are, how can I say, they don't follow all the instruction, so they lost that people. So they can't continue to training the people. To finish, I think it's all. Thank you.
Let me suggest that the four, the two presenters and two discussants just sit in front of us, and then all of us, pose questions and so on. Yeah.
So we respond to questions.
We discuss, we respond. We'll start with and you can ask questions as well. Well, okay, that makes sense.
Temos uma vez.
Senta aqui. Okay, why don't Christine starts maybe reacting a little bit to the comments?
So I'll be quick.
Yeah.
Make sure there's some time for the rest. Okay, so the first, so thank you very much for your comments, Dr. Okay, so I think the first thing I wanted to, I'll talk about 3 or 4 points very quickly. So the first one is the primary versus secondary education. So I completely agree that on paper, from 13 years old onwards, they are supposed to be in secondary schooling. But from what I've seen, and it's been hard actually finding up-to-date data, so that's why your offer of looking into the minute data is fantastic. So I'd like to look into more recent data, but so first in terms of the qualitative work, and also in terms of my conversations with the education specialists from DFID in Maputo. I mean, the girls who we interviewed who were between 12 and 15, they were in 4th, 5th, and 6th. We didn't even talk to any of them in 7th grade, which is the last grade of primary school. The second thing I also would like to gather more information about is to what extent primary schools have developed annexes of secondary schools. Because, for instance, in the school where we were, and I was told that it was now pretty common, the secondary school, which is further away and provides up to 12th grade, so from 8th to 12th grade, has opened a bunch of annexes in different primary schools. So in the case of the primary school where we were, for instance, they had a separate building where they were now offering 8th, 9th, and 10th as well. So I would like to get more information about that. But for instance, the latest I've seen out of an official report from the government, I think maybe 2004, or maybe from the World Bank partnership, from 2004 for Mozambique, they were reporting completion rates, so people who actually passed the final exam of the 7th grade, which is the last grade of primary schooling, or something like 18%. So I think that there are lots of people who basically never reach that stage.
That's not there's slightly change.
I'm sure that things have improved now, but so that's why it would be great to have the latest data.
Because we have data from 2014.
Brilliant. That would be really fantastic, and maybe it means that if we want to keep the same included, we'll have to include secondary schools, and hopefully there will be lots of annexes. So the issue of access, which was one of the reasons why we focused on EP2, because the feedback we got from people from DFID in Maputo was that dropouts started really at EP2 level, and that at least there was a lot of access for primary school, whereas as soon as you enter sort of second, because we're looking at the demand side, I think as soon as you enter into the secondary education aspect, you have the supply side limitations as well. So let's talk about this opportunity. So yeah, of course, all the rest was really interesting. Maybe a clarification in terms of the poverty evaluation. So the idea is to target the program based on the age and gender of the child, but also based based on poverty status of the household. So what we have in mind at the moment, because what we are going to have to do is basically do a census in these areas where we're going to intervene. We'll have to do a census of everybody in that area and have a quick data collection to be able to basically establish who's eligible and who's not. So what we're going to do is have the kind of basic information collection that you get in pretty much every household survey in developing countries, which is asking people about the materials with which the household is made of, ownership of household items such as TV, radio, etc. And then you can calculate a poverty index, basically, and then you can, based on this poverty index, we're probably going to consider, say, the bottom 40% as poor. So it would be nice to know how the government defines poverty status and whether or not we can try and get closer to the sort of, administrative definition whilst maintaining feasibility in terms of logistics of collecting the data and determining eligibility, etc. And I think it should.
Bill, would you like to react a little bit to some of the comments, and then we'll open up?
Thank you once again, and apologies for the late sending of the paper. I thought it was really interesting to know about the work that INEF is conducting, and also about the challenges that the emergence of new foreign firms is creating, namely in terms of health and safety regulations. I think this is quite important. It's of course a big incentive for regulation purposes. I think we've started some sort of dialogue on these matters. Perhaps we can take it further. I don't know, maybe discussing some potential or interest that INEF may have in terms of conducting studies of this type, like the one that was addressed in the context of education. Some studies, some pilot studies involving some specific programs. I mentioned a few in this slide that I presented now. I don't know if perhaps you'd like to discuss to what extent INEF thinks that this sort of procedure is something of interest, developing some small case studies that may actually be quite informative in terms of policies that, if upgraded, can deliver even better results than those that you already mentioned in your presentation.
Yeah, with this new law approved in July of this year, I believe that the Labour Minister and the Education Minister will be more connected than before, because in the past, vocational training were provided by Educational Minister, but now is the Labour Minister. So with this new law, connect two ministries. So I believe that many things will change during this period.
Okay, what I would like to do, we have maybe 3-4 minutes still to open for Q&A, if there are questions, suggestions, comments, and then we will continue after the end of the session. Yes, in the back there.
Hi, well, thank you first to Professor Martin and Gerardo for the excellent presentations. One quick question basically concerns how much money is Mozambique spending on supporting people to stay in or return to work, and what proportion of that is being spent specifically on vocational training?
Okay, so maybe you could yes, if you could repeat the question, and then that's the way we're doing. Okay. Repeat the question and then try to come with an answer. Yeah. Bill.
Well, maybe Final is better qualified to address this question.
You said how much money they?
Yes, I mean, how much money is Mozambique spending on supporting people stay in work or return to work as a proportion of GDP, or if you have the absolute figure? And what proportion of that is being spent specifically on vocational training?
I don't know the number exactly, but there's a big difference. Big difference between
talking about, for example, unemployment insurance, and is that what you're referring to? How much money is being allocated, for example, for unemployment insurance versus vocational training, or?
I don't know exactly now.
Okay. I mean, it's not something.
Okay, it's just order of magnitude. Sunday.
I just had a quick question for Christine. So one of the main problems with Progresso was the manipulation of attendance logbooks, which I think Peter already mentioned. How do you intend to measure attendance and more specifically active learning, which is what we care about ultimately? So.
Okay, so
Okay.
so the question is, in past programs like Progressa, there were basically people fiddled with attendance records. So how will I measure attendance? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, how will I address the question of what happens to actual learning? Is that right? Okay, so Progressa, like many other programs, basically the bottom line is we know a lot about how to send more kids to school in developing countries. We don't really know much about how to improve learning. So we will probably try and measure test scores as well, but I don't particularly expect to find a huge effect, except that you would hope, I know it's crazy, but you would hope that if more kids go to school, the average kid should know more on the test, right? But these effects tend to be small. Okay, so we'll try and measure it, but that's not going to be our main outcome of interest, and we don't expect very large effects. So that's the first thing. And as a sort of parenthesis, I think that addressing the low quality of education in developed countries in general, and Mozambique, for instance, is a really interesting and important research question. That's just not what we're looking at on this one. The thing about attendance, that's a very good point. So basically, the bottom line is that in order to, there's two different things. There is what the conditional payments are going to be based on, okay, and that there might be fiddling. Okay. Although we will have spot checks by our NGO partner, which should hopefully reduce sort of misreporting of attendance. And the second thing is, so that's the first one, the attendance records on which payments are based. And the second one is the attendance records on which our evaluation of the effect of the program on attendance will be based. And for that one, what we want to use is basically, so I'm discussing this with Damien right now, but we will probably end up using as our main measure only the data that will come from the observation by the NGO partner. So in that sense, because, so one of the rules, basically from a research point of view, what you want to be careful about is that your outcome is not incentivized in a way. The outcome you actually measure the effect of the treatment on, and that's why we probably use, this, and then we can compare. This, for instance, there's a paper by Baird and Osler and others, where basically they find that there's a huge discrepancy in attendance as reported by the teacher and attendance as reported by the household, which is what you would expect. So, in fact, in their case, their RCT results were opposite, depending on which outcome they used. So, yeah, we try to use the cleanest possible one, even though the payments will probably be, not completely based on actual records.
Okay, we have time for two more questions, and then I think we have to adjourn. Please.
Well, I'm Makas Shakal from Mozambique Commission. What I would like to hear is, being Mozambican, is to feel what you found in Mozambique compared to what you've seen in the world, compared to the research you've done for other purposes, in two issues. One in education, how to motivate kids, particularly girls, to go to school. My question was, how rural did you find the part you went in Mozambique? How rural it is compared to some other part of the world? I grew up in a rural area, and my school was almost 1 hour walking distance. And we still had some other kids coming from very far than that. So it was bad. I think it was a very difficult situation to motivate people from this area. And I remember in these years, we didn't have so much thing related to school there, like jobs, hospitals, this. So you can imagine how the situation was difficult. I remember the director mentioning the development process side, the poverty issue side. So I'd like to hear your experience on that. For Professor Ben, was this, it's about the informal schemes of training people. Again, in Mozambique, from my own experience, you have lots of people who build the house, they do electrical appliance, water, these water systems. They have never been in any school and they're doing this job. And sometimes they have this difficult moving from the informal to the formal. If you are not able to set a company in a formal way, many times the problem is that when we move to informal, to formal, because the criteria you have papers to present, some of them they don't even have an idea and so on. Their wage drops. But today I realize that some of them are challenging because it's becoming the market in the informal market. Sometimes it's becoming smaller, so they have the need to jump to the formal. But again, they don't feel motivated because when they pass to the formal, they don't treat it as they are in the informal. Because in the informal, they feel themselves like there's a word, a term is commonly used like master. He's a master in the informal market, but when he go to formal market, he's no longer master, and his wage may also drop. I would like to hear your experience on this. If it is working in some other part of the world, how it works.
Why don't we hear Pedro's questions as well? It's right here, and then we wrap up. Pedro.
I have a question for Dr. Soberano, which is very general. You have mentioned a little bit in your presentation the lack of funds on the budget to support this kind of initiative. But I was wondering, generally speaking, I'm sure that the Ministry of Education has sought before about conditional cash transfers, even though this is probably something that's very, very much motivated by learners, generally speaking, in different countries. So I was wondering, what's your personal perspective on the future of conditional cash transfers in Mozambique, or whether really there is a legal space that can be filled, or whether it's far-fetched.
So
that's my first question.
Okay. Second question.
Second question is for Vivian. A little bit coming back to what Professor Martins said. So we are all very keen on finding something that the Institute is really keen on in terms of impact evaluation, in terms of wanting to know what's the impact that you are having with your work. And I was wondering if you have like one idea in mind, like one program that the Institute is really proud of, and something that could be evaluated properly in a proper evaluation. So something that where research would be useful.
Okay, so why don't we start back with the original order, namely Professor Christine first, and so forth. And
So,
A short question or no time?
yeah, sure. You can ask a short question. Yes.
Very shortly. So I was really interested in the approach, and I was wondering if the literature, which I don't know very well, also considers indirect effects in terms of greater attendance of some kids may have some impact in terms of the other kids that are exposed, spear effects following from this. So because I could see it as negative, because these are kids that perhaps don't want that much to be in the class. On the other hand, these are girls, and there is some research evidence that indicates that the presence of girls in classrooms as a positive externality in terms of their peers. So just a short question on this.
Okay, so anyway,
thank you very much.
Professor Christine, Dr. Soberano, Professor Pedro Martins, Mr. Refinado. I mean, that's the sequence. That's it.
my brain starts. So very quickly on this one. So we know that there are peer effects. For instance, in the progressor, I think they estimated peer effects, and they found that yes, it does increase the attendance at school of peers, also that are not eligible. So in terms of the research design, that's why we want to randomize on the score to avoid the peer effects in a single variable evaluation. In practical terms, I think that the peer effects will probably you would expect them to be positive, and so therefore yes, it could also be good. It could be better than what we estimated to be because there might be broader effects. That was very quickly. And Pedro, I know you asked a question to Soran, but so from what I know about conditional cash transfers in Mozambique, my understanding is that the main stumbling block is one of state capability. The idea that at the moment the state doesn't have the resources to be able to implement conditionality is what I hear is the biggest stumbling block. So the way I see our work in this context is to provide a sort of sound evidence base for the options that would be available and context relevant when the government or the Department of Education reaches the stage where they feel that this is something they feel they can do. Maybe we'll talk afterwards.
Sorry?
Maybe we'll talk afterwards because I didn't have time.
Okay.
Okay, Dr. Soberia.
Okay, thank you. Just make a small correction. I'm not a doctor. Regarding the issues, for my personal view, is that we are receiving at the school children that they are not ready to school, the school readiness. And the issues of the school readiness is not just the issue of education. And from my perspective, I think that we have to have an holistic approach. We have to look at the beginning when the children have to have access for the health service, the nutrition, even the social protection. If we have these, I think that will minimize because they will be ready to school. And if we have this is regarding with, it's related with the development. Because when the parents took the children to go to the crops, to the mashamba, sometimes it's not because they are not aware of the meaning or the relevance of the school, but it's a question of subsistence, because the children have to eat. And if the parents have no other way of subsistence, and the only way is just to take some the food from the crop, instead of send the children to the school, they will ask to have all the family together to go to the crop, so they will have at least something to eat. I think that this is, or if I can have this, to put all together, and each one should do their duty, and not just leave this for the education sector. Because now what we have, even because we receive these children that have malnutrition, and we know that the children when they arrive at school, sometimes they come without nothing at home, so the school is trying to supply some meal. But how many children we have to school, and how many meals can we supply? So I think that we have to have more an holistic approach.
Okay, Mr. Pedro asked me what was my opinion about the job that I'm being doing. Is it?
So basically, if there is a program that the institute does that you are particularly proud of, that could be evaluated, rigorously.
Is the women included? Because in the
new program, perhaps, that they will begin to implement?
I didn't mention the program here during the presentation. I didn't mention the program during the presentation, but there is one is still going on. It's a woman included in training, in vocational training, because a lot of vocational training we have in Mozambique directly in the factory, mechanic and electrical. So many women don't go to those training. I don't know why, but the program, the most focus thing in the program is to include the women in the vocational training.
That'd be interesting.
I didn't mention the presentation.
It was much for us. It was much for us.
Gender issue, this is unique. Não, isso seria muito interessante de fazer uma avaliação. So, yeah, that would be a very interesting topic.
The big problem is because a lot of women in Mozambique prefer how can I say, the easy job. To work in the factory, handling big machines, things heavy, they don't want. And in the north of Mozambique, a lot of foreign countries are investing in these jobs. Sazonto, Vale, Odebrecht, and they work with heavy machines. So they hire local people. In those local people they hire, they're not women. So in Maputo in particular, every classroom that we are receiving at least must have 5 women, sorry. So if there are no 5 women, the course don't start. That's the most important program that I think will be good, and I'm in that program too.
It'd be interesting, I'm just making a side comment on this. In Brazil, I'm Brazilian, so in Brazil we had, in the last, I'll say, few years, an excess demand for labor, very low unemployment rates, and both, including the building trades, construction, heavy construction, and employers found that women not only can deal very effectively with heavy machinery, but moreover the productivity is higher. Women tend to be able to concentrate much more. I mean, the degree of concentration, mental concentration, mental alertness is higher on average than men. They're much more careful in handling the equipment, and therefore the accident rates are lower. So, and the reason that women came in the job originally was because there was excess demand, there were not enough men around. So now it turns out there's a slight preference for women because they perform on the job better than on men. Moreover, the rate of, well, how can I put it, of alcohol consumption is lower. Yeah, among women than men. So as a result, people figure out that the productivity levels are higher. So this is something that I think a very interesting topic to look into the Mozambican scene, namely, the extent to which what can be done, if we can design something to stimulate the entry of women into the labor force through this kind of vocational training and technical training. Seria muito interessante. That's a very good suggestion as well.
Can I just complete? Because he asked the question and he hasn't answered. Regarding with those people who doesn't have too much studies, there is a program that been designed for we call this artisan. So the one that has this experience, they can go for this training. The training is to certify if he or she knows how to do, and they will give a certification, and with this certification, he or she can go for an employment and certify that I can do this work. There is a program that is being designed. I think that it was planned to start next year.
Okay, so I'm going to ask before closing, or close the session, but I'm going to ask Cabo, who's our hub economist, who's going to distribute some evaluation forms.
Yeah.
If people could be kind enough to take 3 minutes and just, fill out those forms about today's session. Well, first of all, thank you so much for everybody. I think it was a very useful, very productive session on Mozambique. I think that this was very useful for everybody. Okay, so thank you so much again, and have a great end of the day.
Yeah, I think, I've heard it before, and I
Então, essas duas
hipótese, se pegarem vocês queiram lançar, queiram
Penso que a formação profissional do acordo que é criado em parte pelos sociais, também e de uma forma que possa também facilitar a avaliação posterior. Ou uma coisa nova, mas eventualmente, ou tanto uma coisa que já está feita, como fazer uma coisa nova. E eu num dos slides, havia algumas ideias que é essencial, e se calhar há muitas outras ideias que têm tido, ou que os seus colegas têm tido, e talvez por consultivos poder avançar, talvez seja possível avançá-las numa escala pequena, numa primeira fase, fazer mais
Para a gente e aí o óleo envia para mim. Eu marco esse cima e envio para o campeão.
Quem lá no Ministério não toma essa decisão, eu também não estou assim. Mas o INSS. Então,
não, eu quero até conversar com uma espírito. Você tem que estudar de francês, né? O inglês é francesado.
Está contactado pela
Ai, meu.
Porque em geral, trabalhando com as situações na Europa, que é a cultura que eu conheço, no sentido de mais transição, o salário aumenta. Não diminui, mas há uma diferença. Eu pergunto se estágios, questões de custos adicionais, uma pessoa tem que perguntar a partir do momento em que está a valorizar
As estatísticas normalmente quando está trabalhando para esta sociedade. ele gera o negócio dele. Quando vai ao privado, ele faz parte de uma grande equipe. Então, os Estados Unidos ele tinha esse diminuiu ele por ele era mesmo, fica por um ajudante. Mas acho que é uma fase transitória também. Pode dar. Vai reduzir, não tem cada vez mais coisas para a qualidade,
Pois é. Não percebi.
Onde é que vende?
Onde é que vendem? Nas lojas da Apple tem.
Na loja, ok.
Aí tenho de certeza. Mas eu penso que lojas de informática tem.
Deixa-me só tirar.
Veja lá, que prefere assim? Eu trago sempre para as aulas.
Sim.
É importante.
Tem um número aqui? Então tem um
Nós devemos ter no perfil. Porque o Brasil foi também uma equipa de 3 pessoas, eles fizeram coisas
Obrigado. Olha, muito obrigado. Até nós novo. Prazer, então. Até mais. Olha, muito obrigado. Prazer, então. Olha, muito obrigado. Excelente. Tá?
Qualquer coisa, a gente tem que comprar já vou mandar bastante vídeos, dados e tudo.
Também tem logo, pode ser
Gente, o Steve tem uma coisa para fazer. Disse minha mãe, eu não estou aqui, você está com ah, você está aqui nessa sala. Foi um prazer, Pedro. E acho que a ideia que esse rapaz teve é muito interessante isso aí. A questão de fazer que é pouco comum essa abordagem, pelo menos se a gente pudesse de alguma forma começar a perseguir isso. Pode ter isso. Eu tenho que ir. Foi um grande prazer. Pelo amor de Deus, vamos conseguir esses 150 minutos. A gente não pode parar esse teu projeto.
normalmente o negócio ser baseado nessa apresentação.
Há uma certa flexibilidade, mas eu não
Dá um bocadinho de background e depois um bocadinho para o também onde é que
dá uma pensada também, Sandra, o que a gente pode.
É mais ou menos isto e depois a proposta.
É isso aí. Muito bem, são 200. Quantas crianças você está?
Ao nível da
estamos a pensar em 200 unidades e depois o cálculo eu tinha na cabeça, mas eu contei
em março vai ser difícil ter informações. Mas ao nível da eficácia consegue ajudar
em 6
viagens.
anos e depois fiz uma avaliação. Não sei, quando eu sei. É capaz de ser.
150 mil países.
Sim, sim.
5 mil países. É uma amostra fantástica.
Mas tem de ser, porque a regulamentação, para não havermos perfeitos, temos de fazer ao nível da escola. Então, pedimos muito.
Isso acho que a 30 libras você consegue.
O nosso objetivo é isso.
Quer dizer, a verdade, estamos a ver nas escolas, porque é estar assim mais relaxados em termos de
Deixa o.
sim.
Nós vamos falando com algum conhecido do governo e o nosso ponto de contacto é o Ministério de Planificação, que também é que tem uma perspectiva bastante abrangente sobre todo o governo, supostamente em ligações e portanto esse é o nosso ponto de contacto, mas depois também temos boas ligações com o Banco Central, neste caso vai ser muito relevante. E depois com alguns ministérios específicos. Nós com a educação não estamos a começar, de facto. A educação, o trabalho, é tudo. Vamos a começar, mas com a educação já há algum Cristina já vai adiantado, uma grande fazer o trabalho, tem mundial para fazer este projeto, mas também continuar. Mas pronto, fora isso, não há assim, tem havido grande contacto. Mas através da planificação, nós digamos, tocamos quase todos os setores, se for necessário. E, portanto, nós vamos sabendo da parte deles quais são as prioridades. E, de facto, nesta, a grande prioridade dos recursos naturais, um grande acontecimento da economia moçambicana, na atualidade. Mas depois a grande pergunta é como é que se pode usar isto em favor das pessoas, não é? Portanto, como é que se pode passar isto às pessoas, estas coisas boas. E de facto, aí quase que imediatamente se fala de formação profissional e de treino a um nível avançado. Não sei se é a educação propriamente de crianças, que obviamente é importante, mas não é imediatamente importante.
Não temos aqui um medo, estava quase a pensar, mas podemos escrever aqui, estava a pensar, portanto, eu acho que pode haver aqui um contacto junto da embaixada, como disse a minha mulher, só para ter um bocado de contexto, porque aquilo que estava aqui a referir, não é dar conhecimento desta sessão, e ter aqui uma nota exploratória sobre como é que eu vejo perspectivas do lado do governo moçambicano de ter interesse numa coisa deste tipo, não é? Depois de haver um contacto junto do IFP português na lógica do Centro de Formação Profissional na área da metodologia, porque eles já têm estruturas mais avançadas em termos de data collection, não é? Sistemas de informação, abertura à ideia do projeto piloto, poderá haver aqui maior. Não é? E depois, aqui manter o contacto, não é, junto do INEF nesta fase exploratória para também ver até que ponto é que isto tem realmente sequência como.
Pois assim, é muito importante a contraparte, é uma condição necessária, não há. Mas obviamente tudo o que o IFP tem a certeza absoluta que seria utilíssimo, achava, não é? Com certeza. São todos contactos ótimos e que podem ajudar.
E depois, no quarto ponto, tem a ver um bocado com a literatura sobre formação profissional em países em desenvolvimento, não é? Que eu procurei conhecer e não encontrei grandes contribuições. Portanto, não encontrei quase nada. Mas se calhar. Eu procurei mal, e é mau, ou é bom, não é? Mas, portanto, há algumas coisas sobre a introdução de subsídios de emprego, no país de desenvolvimento, alguma coisa sobre impactos da idade mínima para começar a trabalhar, mas agora esta ideia de um contexto de educação relativamente baixo, contexto de grande formalidade, fazer aqui uma aposta na formação profissional.
Quem está a trabalhar um bocadinho nisso é um rapaz que se chama Isaac Mbiti. Isaac, exatamente. É Mbiti, exatamente. está na Southern Methodist University, nos Estados Unidos. E ele está a fazer um conjunto de estudos sobre apprenticeships, e acho que é no Quênia mesmo. Portanto, de facto não há assim muita coisa, mas é capaz de haver uns bons passos, assim, mas acho que é um tema importante, isso não há dúvida, começa a ser, digamos, posto para a frente, a quantidade de países, especialmente nestes países que têm.
E não haverá algo, quer dizer, se calhar não é vocational training, mas não haverá alguma coisa a fazer com os empregos novos que vão vir da exposição de gás natural? Porque eu estava a falar com alguém do Ministério da Planificação e Desenvolvimento e ela estava a dizer, quer dizer, explicou-me o que eles iam fazer. E então vai acontecer é que as companhias estrangeiras vão formar pessoas e coisas assim, então se calhar isto podia ser alguma coisa, porque, quer dizer, era só um indivíduo, não é? Mas ela parecia assim, ter assim a mente de perceber o que uma avaliação rigorosa ia contribuir. Não sei.
Porque neste momento a coisa sobre a diferença dos salários entre os trabalhadores e diferentes tipos de empresas. Aí há muitos donos, há uma cultura grande. E depois há pessoas que argumentam que essas diferenciais têm a ver com o facto de as empresas estrangeiras terem melhor propensão para dar a formação aos seus trabalhadores. Embora também sejam empresas que com certeza vão selecionar melhores trabalhadores, vão recrutar pessoas com outros perfis. Portanto, não sei, talvez alguns faltam dessas empresas, mas
Não sei, se calhar vai haver uma queue, vai haver uma rationing das pessoas que vão conseguir entrar nestes programas. Não sei, então isto podia ser uma amostra, não é? Para randomizar. Quem entra e quem não entra, não sei. Mas eu queria perguntar, então, mencionou dois papéis no AER, falando da qualidade dos professores, mas era a ver com a educação profissional ou é em geral?
Não, era mesmo o ensino normal.
Tá bem, então, e eles identificavam que aspecto da prática do professor é que criava as diferenças em test scores?
Há um paper mais antigo na econométrica.
Brief Kid então.
Exato.
Sim, e o que eles dizem é que há muita variação, mas não há nada de observável que está correlado. É por isso que eu queria saber, que tenho um papel assim um bocado ligado.
Ok, este só eu acho, não sei dizer. Agora, a identificação é semelhante e acho que o resultado é sobretudo, sim, mas é sobretudo sobre, portanto, qual é o impacto em termos de desempenho, tanto no curto prazo como no longo prazo, eles conseguem seguir as coisas durante muito tempo, mas não propriamente o que é que explica a diferença de desempenho dos professores.
Opening the black box.
Não, é mais estabelecer de facto solidariedade.
Era só para saber se precisava atualizar o que eu pensava que era que a gente não sabe.
São dois papers dos mesmos autores, do mesmo número, mas um acho que é curto prazo e outro é longo prazo. Os meus temas para o curto prazo.
Eu vi Sandman, não é?
É,
Part 1 e Part 2.
Estes dois são mais.
Sim, vai ser
São mais firms, não é?
Ok, sim.
Um bocadinho labor market, mas.
Há um plano qualquer de apresentar, assim? Eu estou aqui esta noite, vou embora amanhã de manhã, mas. Quer dizer, no pressure. Se não há plano, não há plano.
Vai ficar por aqui?
Sim, quer dizer, agora?
Agora, vais?
Eu ia ainda falar um bocadinho com a Sandra, mas estou agora ocupada com o bebê, por isso não.
Pronto, eu
Está bem, então até já. Fico aqui.
Pronto, não há assim, que eu saiba, não há muito. Estes são especialistas, estes dois últimos são especialistas em farmacêutica. De facto, não é assim um grupo de Oxford